Hi, welcome to Humpday Hangouts. We got an exciting kind of an action-packed show for you today. The topic today is Hurricane Harvey. Harvey hits Houston. I was fortunate enough to have some help in the Houston area through a good friend of the Louisville Fire Department, Matt White, who arranged a nice panel of guests. So we've got some interesting perspective for you today. With some representation from Houston and one of our Louisville guys that deployed to the hurricane area to assist with recovery. You're used to hearing probably Chief Lasky. Chief Lasky's out and away today. He's delivering a keynote address somewhere up on the East Coast. So we wish him well. I think he's traveling back today. So you've got me at the controls. And we will start off our show. If you want to get involved and send us any questions or questions for the panel, you can do so through Twitter and use the hashtag FETalk, Fire Engineering Talk, FETalk, and we'll try to get to those as they come in. And then as a quick reminder, we got FDIC April 23rd through the 28th, 2018. I think there's some registration activities available for you now, so don't wait. Get registered for that. So let's just cut right to it. We've got an hour, and I have no doubt we can fill that with some interesting conversations. So I've got with me today Matt White. He's a district chief with the Houston Fire Department. Matt is actually coming to us from a shelter. So he's working right now, and he's a boots-on-the-ground guy in one of the shelters. So that's proof positive that Houston's still doing a lot of great work right now. I've also got with us Dr. Kevin Schulz. He's an assistant medical director for Houston Fire Department. And I think he's coming from a training academy down there. And then probably the most interesting guest we've got today is Beau Moreno from Houston Fire. Beau is coming to us from Puerto Rico live right now. He is deployed with a Texas task force down there. So he's doing some hurricane jumping this year, leaving Houston to go down to Puerto Rico. And he was just telling us that came through there last night. And so they're doing some good work down there, assisting those folks with that hurricane. So with that being said, Beau, I don't want to lose you. I'd like to kind of turn to you first. And you just kind of showed us an interesting view out of your window, kind of a live shot of Puerto Rico. But give us kind of an update of what's happening there right now and what you guys are up to.
Right now, we're trying to take shelter right now. It's still got tropical storm force winds going. We have a lot of flooding in our hotel right now. You can see there's just water coming from everywhere.
All right, as expected, we're getting cut out a little bit. Anyway, this is breaking ground stuff for Humpday Hangouts. So we're getting some live footage from Puerto Rico, and again, that's Beau Moreno with the Houston Fire Department. Your signal, we're losing you a little bit, but if you're in a stairwell, that's to be expected. The main thing is stay safe. We appreciate you jumping on here with us. But first of all, and I'm sorry, I totally neglected my partner there, Michael McComas. Captain McComas is a Louisville Fire Department captain. He is joining us. Michael is one of our firefighters that deployed to the Houston area. Michael, you were in Rockport, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so Michael went down with our guys, was down there 7 days, and then I was just telling the panel we still have firefighters deployed in the Rockport area currently. So Michael was gracious enough to jump on here with us as well and kind of give a perspective of what was going on outside of Houston. So with all that being said, I guess the first thing I'd like to know, and you know, to anyone who can fill in, but how is Houston doing right now? What's going on today as far as taking care of the victims and getting Houston back on track?
Sure. So, I mean, the big picture, we're starting to kind of really move on with the kind of move forward with taking care of people. At one point, we had over almost a time. Those numbers have dropped significantly. The big piece now is, you know, our services are generally back to normal. There are some impacts on the fire and police that I'll leave to Chief White and some other people, but we're kind of getting back into the process. The problem we had is that there was just quite a bit. There wasn't a ton of, hurricane destruction. It was water destruction. And a lot of people lost parts of their homes or need to do quite a bit of, remodeling where the home itself is destroyed. And those people are all still either trying to find a place to be or trying to move back into those homes and start renovating, start fixing it. But the number of people in those cases and some of the areas, Houston's a flood-prone city, but some places flooded that don't normally flood. And that caused a lot of problems for some people.
Okay. Hey, Matt, let's talk just a little bit about, let's say the first 12 to 24 hours. What were the biggest challenges? I mean, obviously we're talking in excess of 50 inches of rainfall. I can't even comprehend that, and I can't even comprehend the square mileage involved in this. But the first 12 to 24 hours, what were some of, I guess, maybe the challenges that someone who hasn't been through something like this, maybe something that you didn't expect?
Terry, I lost what you were asking there. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, sir. Are you there? How about Beau? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm back. I got out of the stairwell, so
yeah, all right.
I'm here.
So, Beau, let me. I know that you were on kind of the front lines, right? You were out doing. I think you did some long line rescue, helicopter type stuff, high water stuff. So you're out there, boots on the ground. So those the initial flooding, the initial impact of this within the first 12 hours for Houston. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys had to overcome?
Well, the first thing that we had a brand new truck that we just got in, so it was something that I'm kind of familiar with, but wasn't 100% familiar with this vehicle. So that was my first challenge right there. And then heading to areas that I've never worked in before, just being in areas that I've never seen flood like this before. And it was almost unreal how much water there was. Just we're coming up to, we're driving a vehicle, a 5-ton military truck that was, 6 feet high, and that's where the headlights were. And I had water up to the headlights. So that was one of the first challenges, just coming down streets that I've never been down and just trying to make sure that I keep it on the road and stay out of the ditches. Secondly, what we had is just moving people. People were unsure of, do I want to leave? Do I not want to leave? And we just told them straight up. We just said, look, if you don't come out now, we're not coming back. This is it. This is your ride out. Let's go. So, and, just convincing people to leave. That was one of our challenges.
So at some point in time, I'm assuming there has to be some kind of triage as well. Communications is overwhelmed. The call and necessity of resources is overwhelmed. And how do you start triaging what you can address or can't address?
Well, we pulled up to one. It was a post office, and they said we have about 100 people here. And so we just told the people, look, women and elderly first. Women, children, elderly first, and then after that, we'll come back and get the men. We were able to move 100 people out of that post office within an hour or two.
Matt, are you back? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
And then on the larger scale, just city-wise, priorities. We set up area commands. We had several areas kind of became large area. We had lots of operations. We set up area commands, and they would kind of triage the calls themselves, but priority went first to medical, we had active medical emergency. Then it was triage to people who were reporting like rising water versus I just need to get out. And then, but those were kind of handled more on the area level because Houston, at baseline, Houston's such a large area that trying to coordinate all that from an EOC level just wasn't gonna work. We had to break that down to the area level. And then even within the area command, guys like Beau on the front line having to make those calls on the spot.
So, Doc, you were at a shelter at the convention center. Is that right?
So I spent Saturday night on an evac boat in one part of town, just pulling people out of the water because that's where I could lend a hand. And then as of Sunday, when we stood up the primary shelter at the George R. Brown Convention Center, I was there pretty much the whole time from there on for the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and that's in something in the realm of 10,000 people. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. Within about 48 hours, I think we peaked out just at about 10,700, so almost 11,000 people.
Okay. Okay. So probably something that's tabletop, probably something that's done in the way that we train and try to train for something of this magnitude. How do you, what, I guess, give me an idea of training preparation leading up to something like this, and then actually dealing with 10,000 people in a temporary shelter. How prepared were you?
Obvious. So a couple of one of the biggest problems we ran into is the fact that, you know, when we first got there to the shelter, we first got HFD units on site at the shelter. The shelter was open, and there were several hundred people in the building already, and there were lines of dump trucks full of wet people out front waiting to come in. So we didn't have a lot of time to set up the way we would normally want to kind of pre-stage everything set it up. So we had to build it on the fly, and we had to build it with our resources, and we had to kind of fit it into our normal response model, into what we were going to put there. And eventually, you know, as it grew, one of our senior supervisors made the call that, you know what, it's an MCI. Let's pull an MCI box just to get some resources. But one of the biggest things from a training standpoint and a prep standpoint that we hadn't really anticipated, that became a big deal and we had to deal with on the fly, was the chronic care of certain kinds of patients. And the two big ones that got us the most were patients on HOMO-2 who showed up with an oxygen tank that ran out, and patients who needed dialysis, and all the dialysis centers are underwater. And those are patients that we were doing our best to not send to the hospitals, because we didn't, at that point, from George R. Brown, we could really only access about 2 or 3 hospitals because of high water. We transported to 46 different hospitals with HFD, but I could only get to 2 or 3 of them. So protecting those ERs was a huge part, so that when the guys in the fields had somebody who was actually sick, they could go to the hospital. And so that was a big piece we hadn't actually planned for, that we had to kind of figure out. And that would be one of the biggest pieces, because every shelter can be different. You know, they said it's a 4,000 person shelter. We can stretch it to 5,000. We put almost 11,000.
Wow.
But I think that was one of the biggest pieces for me, was figuring out what to do with those, you know, those chronically ill, rather than just send them to the ER.
Sure.
Hey, Terry.
Yep. You're
I'm
back.
back in the ball game here. I can hear now.
Okay.
Something just what really stressed us out. Well, there were a lot of things, you know, because you got to always remember when something like this happens in a department's response area, that we ourselves are victims.
Sure.
Right? Our manpower lost their homes. Our manpower lost their cars. The department lost, I can't even tell you how many vehicles we lost. We had stations flooded out. Like we're victims ourselves, and you're trying to still respond. On top of that, of, you know, our normal brain set of like doing the area level command and getting out to affect the rescues, you know, on the rescue and the patient part, was, you know, you're just stressed out, and you're thin on resources, and that OEM levels, you know, that bunker that had the regional and the state and the federal resources coming in. That's great, and you need it coming, and it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 24 hours, and maybe in 48 hours. But I think something else that Doc was kind of hitting on was, despite that level of, you know, being strained on all your resources, once you get to the securing the citizen part of it, you know, the recovery, you got the rescue done, you're in the recovery mode part. And that's happening. It's fluid. It's not like the whole town's being rescued and then the whole town's in recovery mode after a week. You know, it's right. Like these guys were rescued the first day. Now we got to find a place for them. These guys didn't get rescued until the 3rd day. We're still doing rescues. It's real ongoing. But those initial resources to like set up these shelters, that falls on the fire department most of the time, wherever you are, and, you know, we go into MCI guideline mode, right? That's what we're going to default to, is lots of people, lots of problems. Get resources here, resources that you don't have. And it's a monumental task, and you know, there's a whole lot of stretching thin and a whole lot of long hours work, you know. But I just want to make sure all the departments know, and the guys who are watching the video, that when things like that happen and you're the victim, and you're still doing the rescues, you still got the stuff in the street work that has to get done, but then you got all these people in, and the fire department also gets looked to be the initial person who sets up these things. And then it's just, God, where are you getting those resources from now? And it gets done, but everybody, everybody be ready for that if it happens somewhere in their city or town.
Yeah, well, and to that, real quick, Terry, sorry to tag on to Matt there, is just the fact that, in the first, we had 10,000, we had over 10,000 people at George R. Brown before we had any federal resources in that building. And that was purely run through the fire department. And so those guys who could not be out on the street making rescues, could not be out on the street making 911 runs, had to be there doing that piece too. So that piece was a big part. And we at that point didn't have, kind of anything pre-planned for that piece. And that's something that was a big part of that. So again, absolutely what Mattler said was really important for anyone planning this. So, and one of my questions, I'll throw this to you. I want to go to Cap McComas just for a second, but you guys can think about this, because what I was thinking of is, and you kind of alluded to it, Matt, what did that bunker look like in the 8th hour of this, and what did it look like in hour 72 of this? And I want to talk a little bit about your infrastructure. You mentioned equipment and stations, and I'm really interested in communication component and how did things hold up? Were you able to communicate via radio, cell phone, all those sort of things? But Cap McComas, you've got a little bit different perspective in this, in that you were resourced out to Rockport, which is an outlying community from Houston. I'm not sure how far away that was. You can probably tell us, but what Houston, I think, and again, I wasn't there, and I hope I'm phrasing this correctly, but I think Houston's primary issue was flooding. Rockport had a little bit different scenario in that I think they took the brunt of the actual hurricane winds and storm and stuff like that. So, Michael, what did you see?
Well, Chief, it was quite an eye-opening experience. We've experienced tornado damage up here. Been in the kind of the tail end of Tornado Alley most of my life, most of my career, but to see this much large-scale, broad-scoped wind damage was pretty impressive. I texted my wife the first night down there and said, I would love to be able to say that these pictures say everything, but they can't in any way communicate the vastness of the devastation that was there. So you had homes that were, destroyed, and there'd be a home next to it that wasn't even missing a shingle. So it was kind of confusing to a degree, but it was very broad. We were assigned to Rockport, which was part of Aransas County. Aransas County is just north of Corpus, so it's probably, just making a geographical guess, it's probably still 2 hours away from Houston, hour and 45. South Texas fellas, y'all may have a better idea of that distance. 3 hours. Okay. But nonetheless, it was a different animal. The level of destruction was impressive, especially for a landlocked fellow like myself up here in North Texas, who's not used to seeing that broad scope of damage.
Michael, when you went down, because Louisville still has assets deployed in Rockport. So when you went down, how many days post-storm did you go?
14.
Okay, so at 14 days, you get the impression were the resources there that operationally things were happening the way that they should be happening? And when I say were they there, I'm not faulting anyone that they are there, aren't there. I'm just trying to get a perspective of how long it takes to get things back on track.
So they had federal and state resources were there. Our mobilization was part of a state resource, the TIFMAS program, and they were functioning very well at that point. But again, I'm 15 days from the date of the incident, and they're up and running. Effectiveness or efficiency, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I do know that if we needed something on the first response side, we could readily get to it, fairly simple. The fire station we were stationed at was being powered by generators, so we had lights. The city got the water up and running while we were down there, so we ended up getting hydrants and were able to abandon our drafting sites as primary water sources for structure fires and wildland fires. But the people seem to be getting hooked up with FEMA and the state representatives at about the 16-day mark, probably 16, 18, somewhere in there, while we were during our deployment down there.
I know that the first cruise we sent down, and we sent a group of chainsaw guys, which I gave them a pretty hard time about being designated as a chainsaw guy, and he had to walk around in chaps all day. But I know that in a couple of days into this, they called back and said, we need fuel, chains, bar oil. But it was, again, things that you take for granted. But we loaded up a truck and made that haul down there, and they drove a couple of hours out of the impacted zone to meet us just to get fuels to run saws. But again, that was probably within 48 hours of the event hitting. But so getting back to communications, so can someone give me an idea, because obviously that's the one of the most critical parts. How impacted was the communications infrastructure? Did it work, and were you able to use cell phones? And I just imagine all the networks are jammed, and so how did that component work?
Well, cell phone wise was, the towers get more messed up from the winds, right?
Right.
We actually did pretty good cell phone wise here from just rain and floods. But I'm sure Mike, when he got down there, I'm sure that they were still struggling more with communications in the wind area. So up here wise, we were actually doing pretty good cell phone wise, and we actually accomplished a lot of communications through cell phone. And Doc, did you have that experience when you would go up to the OEM?
Oh yeah, no, it was all cell phone. Never had an issue with cell phone. The only issue we had with cell phone is we received through the Peace app. They received something like 50,000 911 calls in the first 24 to 48 hours, and so because everybody's calling to get out, right, and then they're calling, they're not getting through, so they're calling back, and so that was one of the big issues with some of the rescue pieces on the OEM side, was that you're only gonna, the only difference between the guy that we sent a boat to pick up and the guy we didn't in the house next door is this guy got through on 911 and that guy didn't. So there was that piece, but the cell phones worked the whole time. And I was at the shelter. I mean, I was running on 2 cell phones and charging them twice a day because we were just rolling on that, but it was always on cell phone. Cell phone never went out, which was awesome.
Just
Beau,
curious, Mike, how were the cell phones when you got down to the Bay Area down there?
They were intermittent. DPS, Department of Public Safety, had brought in a radio trailer, and they had cross-patched and set up so that we could try to get the VHF and 800 band radio systems co-communicating. It was intermittent, and cell phones were up when we got there. We're at day 14, but they would drop at an instant and be gone for hours, and then all of a sudden they would come back. I think a lot of that had to do. I'm sorry.
You guys were working more on radios?
About half and half. Now we were on direct. It was all line of sight. We had no repeaters that were working. So once we got out of within a mile or two of the station where we were being dispatched out of, we went to cell phones when we had cell phone signal. If not, we just wrote a good address down and had a good old-fashioned map in our hand and had to figure it out.
All right.
And just to clarify that number, I just pulled up the information I got. In 15 hours, we had 56,000 911 calls. In 15 hours, less than a day. Typical is about 8,000 in a day. So 15 hours should be like, 6,500, 6,000.
And the fact that, honestly, the communication, the routing systems, and all of those sort of things, as far as the 911 infrastructure, I'm just amazed that talk about an actual real test of your back end infrastructure. So the city of Houston, the fire department. So how many stations did you guys lose, or how many stations were flooded?
There were, out of the roughly about 100 stations we have, a lot of stations got water in them, right? But we had 3 or 4 stations that had to be evacuated. And there's a couple of those are legacies where they've been flooded out before. There was actually one of them that before, right when it was announced, hey, 30 to 50 inches, they went ahead and moved those guys, right? And we do have plans affected with some of our hurricane guideline plans, where there are some stations that are pre-planned to move from where they're at and back in. And so that happened, but it was one of those things, Chief, that there were neighborhoods in Houston that have never flooded, right. 4 or 5 feet flooded. You can't. You know, it was just one of those type of events. But lots of stations got water in them. We lost lots of vehicles. I don't have the numbers on those. I don't know if you're looking at them or not, Doc. I could pull them up. But we did take heavy damage to our facilities. You know, the police department did too. Just lots of general first responder asset losses that happen, which only helps to complicate the problem.
Sure. So I guess the other thing, and this is always kind of a topic when we have a large scale, like a natural disaster. So, I mean, I can speak for our department. A majority of our members of our department don't live close to Louisville. So if we suffer some event that comes through here, we wouldn't necessarily see the personal impact on the personnel because they may live 45 miles away from here. A little bit different in your situation because I don't know that I would assume that 90% of your personnel probably live within an impacted area of this particular storm. So what's the, and this was something that I talked to one of our battalion chiefs. He had a conversation with a gentleman from Oklahoma that dealt with one of the large tornadoes up there. But it was something that he talked a lot about was the fact that the first responders are out doing what they do, but at the same time, they're worried about, their own homes, their own kids, their wives, their families, their extended families, things like that. So what kind of impact did you all deal with as far as that?
Well, I think from all the way down from where we are and east of us too, towards Beaumont and that area all the way into Louisiana, that area of you talking about, the affected area, that affected first responders in their homes, all the way definitely down to where Mike is now. And so it was just lots and lots of widespread flooding, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of square miles, and lots of people who couldn't get to work. Lots of people who, I guess the flood event, which is a little more unique, a mass flooding event of that big of a nature, a little more unique than like a tornado event or a smaller flood event, because that water gets there and stays there. It's, a storm goes through and you drive around the trees and you get where you're going. But some of this water was in neighborhoods for days, if not longer than that. And so you really end up with people all trapped on islands who can't get out of there, and not just in Houston area, all the way down for where Mike's at. Down closer to where the storm hit, it is just debris. Sometimes you can't get somewhere because of the amount of debris that's around when you catch the brunt of these storms, right? And then a little further off where we were, it was just the amount of water on the roads, the amount of washed out bridges. And so it was huge, just not for our department, but there's fire departments, a lot of the volunteer departments around here, the smaller paid professional agencies that are just wiped out. Their stations are gone, their apparatus are gone. It's a bad situation down here. So,
Doc, I know ahead of time, obviously, we sent some medical resources down there, I think, on Thursday. Do you have a rough idea? Obviously, Houston's the fourth largest city in the country, I think, certainly the largest in Texas. But the amount of patients that were moved out ahead of this storm, do you have an idea of what those numbers are?
So only one of our hospitals evacuated ahead of the storm. A lot now. They started moving. I don't have good numbers on this nursing home. We know this nursing home flood. We're going to move our patients. I don't have great numbers on that. I know one of our hospitals, East Houston Regional, has notoriously flooded, and they've actually lost power several times and had emergency evacuation. So they have actually evacuated and shut the hospital down ahead of the storm. And that was probably the biggest single medical evacuation that we did. Once you got into the storm, the issue on the healthcare infrastructure side was a matter of you really couldn't. It was hard to evacuate people once you're in the storm because, as Matt mentioned, you couldn't get anywhere, and we couldn't get to, like I said, from George R. Brown, which is pretty much in the middle of the city. I could get to maybe 3 hospitals in the first 36 to 72 hours, just because there was just standing water. You couldn't get anywhere. You can get on the freeways. Most of the freeways were actually reasonably passable, but you couldn't get off the freeway because everything off the freeway was blocked with water. So there wasn't a huge mass exodus as there have been sometimes from previous storms in terms of evacuating a ton of medical patients to other places. There was kind of these need to go, those pieces, but it also became a much more complex process because, you know, those that did get stuck, you know, you had issues. I know of at least one nursing home with about 200 people in it that ended up on an island surrounded by about 6 feet of water. And they were okay, and they were going to lose power because they were going to run out of gas for their generator. And now we got to get them out. So those kind of things became very complicated process. And later into the storm, or later into the rescue and recovery process, several days in, one of the federal assets that was utilized was a special needs shelter was set up for those kind of patients. And they did take in a lot of those patients that needed to go, rather than relocating them to hospitals and nursing homes further out, just again, because of, you know, the ability of getting them out was difficult.
Yeah. Hey, Beau, are you still here? I know I don't have video on you. You may have shut that down to reserve power. Are you still? Yeah,
I'm trying to send them a different message right now. I don't know. You know, they're getting hit by a Cat 5 right now.
Yeah. I told them earlier, I said it's like a Fox News report, and you're standing out in the high winds there.
Right. Hey, I was interested from Mike about the actual what's going on with the Rockport, Aransas Pass fire departments. What's the situation that they're in?
They are running at best at a skeleton crew. I think Rockport, when I left on Sunday and came home, they had 5 to 7, kind of depending on where it was, of their 50-plus members that were available to respond. And that's part of what our remaining response is down there is we're backfilling. The TIPMAS program is backfilling the 911 for pretty much Aransas County. It's got Port Aransas covered, Rockport and Fulton. They've all got TIFMAS crews assigned there, both engine strike teams and brush unit strike teams, type 6 to type 1 engines. So that's pretty much what they're doing is augmenting response, because most of the folks there, in fact, there was a few families that were still living in the Rockport fire station because they've lost everything. But a lot of them, they don't, you know, their responders live in that community. When that community was hit, their responders are no longer available.
All right.
How, I know this is, what's your best thoughts on, so obviously you're still in a shelter, Matt, helping out. And so you're still operating shelters. I think there's still a shelter. I think I read this morning that 2 of the larger ones had closed. They've consolidated. And I think Dallas is still running a shelter. But what's your guess on, I don't even know to say normalcy. I don't know, just the amount of devastation. And of course, just the process of making a claim through FEMA, getting a house, you know, repaired, livable. I guess, like, where are you at now, and what's your best guess on what normalcy, what kind of normalcy you get back to?
I mean, every day there are less people at our shelters, right? There's you know, I'm glad you asked that, because, you know, kind of it was all happening and it was on the news, and now, you know, we had a horrible hurricane hit Florida, and, you know, there's kind of more of an emergency there. And then, you know, what's happening now in Puerto Rico, but still, you're correct. It's still lingering on here. And look at me, it's still taking up fire department resources. Here we are still. Thankfully, you know, on most of these shelters, there are some that are being run strictly by charitable organizations. There are some being run by Harris County, right? Doc, if I'm wrong, but all the federal assets are gone, right? They all went to Florida. And
yeah, that's correct. So, and that's one kind of really important point is, like I mentioned earlier, the first 48 were fire department run. After about 2 weeks, especially with the incoming Irma hit bearing down on Florida, we lost all the federal resources out of those shelters, and it came back. You know, during a lot of the time we had federal resources, it was a relatively minimal fire department involvement at the shelter. We had ambulance strike teams, we had DMATs, we had lots of personnel to help, but then they had to pull out and they had to redeploy, and it came back on. You know, we've got our district chief over EMS is sitting in a shelter right now, 3.5 weeks out. So that's kind of is a very good point. But yeah, all the federal resources redeployed out of the area. kind of in the last, probably about a week ago, a week to, between 4 and 10 days ago.
And as far as you mentioned earlier, Matt, talking about debris, and that's something that always kind of fascinates me, that when you consider the amount of debris post one of these storms, and the city of Houston, how's that process keeping up with getting streets cleared and
yeah,
moving?
that's a real problem. There's so many houses damaged here, and then what does everybody do, right? Everybody gets all that sheetrock, all that carpet, and it all goes out to the curbside. And there are literally neighborhoods in Houston that have it starts real neat by the sidewalk on it,
Yeah.
and then it's in the street.
Yeah.
And then we are having access problems down certain neighborhoods. You're trying to drive a tower truck down these neighborhoods, and it's all this stuff overloaded on them, and you get the rest of the city involved with that, with the rest of the solid waste department and all the heavy trash, and you're really dependent on all those guys. And, here's a whole other, department of the city that you end up finding yourself dependent on to get this job done, to clear these streets out, So even just in our own little urban area inside our city limits, there's, war zone type streets to try and get down.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even, when I was reading, I did Chief Lasky's radio show last week, and we spent a time, and at that point I kind of did a brief rundown of just a little bit of information about Houston, so that if somebody was listening, they had an idea. And I think I had run across Houston, 1,600 square miles, I think, city of Houston, but I think it had said there was up to 28,000 square miles of impacted, flooded, damaged. And that's absolutely so overwhelming to me. I can't even imagine the scope of not just the rescue, but the recovery is even more daunting.
The recovery and the damage. I ended up finding an email here, a city email. This is just damage to city vehicles. All right. So Houston Fire Department, we lost 15 engines, 4 ladder trucks, 10 ambulances, and then another a handful of other light vehicles. The Houston Police Department lost 144 response vehicles, and there's other on there from the fleet, the garbage trucks, the parks, the rest of the city. But just as far as first responders, there, 15 engines and 4 trucks.
Well, yeah. So, and of course, everybody that's in this business understands you're not going to replace those. That stuff takes time, and it's not as though you can, go to Austin and pick something off a lot and
right. We'll take that one.
Yeah. Right. So I'll be back at 5 when it's done with make ready.
Right.
That's overwhelming. So here's something I want to know, and I'm curious about this, because I thought when I saw the press conference, I thought it was a very, I don't know the proper word, a courageous thing to do, because I kind of feel as first responders, we're very prideful people. We take a lot of pride in the fact that we are 911. And when you call, Chief Lasky used to say, there is no 912. So when they call you, whatever it is, that you're it. But so I think sometimes we have a difficult time maybe asking for help, allowing help, opening our walled garden, I guess, to let outsiders in. The Cajun Navy. So now, again, from an outsider's view, so I see the press conference where I think it was a county commissioner or somebody that basically got up there and said, listen, if you have a boat, we need your help. And from my perspective, I thought, man, that is absolutely, thank you for saying that, because this is way beyond the scope of the Rockport Fire Department and the Houston Fire Department in my eyes and opinion. Of course, what I'm hearing validates a little bit of that. I'm just curious to know what your thoughts and on the work that was done by a group of the most ragtag volunteers, and I think they're actually getting a fair amount of experience at this from what I understand. But we certainly hear a lot of great stories, but I'm kind of curious to know on y'all's perspective how that operation worked.
You know, yeah, you're right. It's great when you're to that point where you're humble enough, or you know, you're in that position where, hey, we need help getting people out. There's lives at stake, and if you can offer assistance, let's get this done together. It's great that people responded. There's plenty of boats down here. You know, we got Galveston Bay and plenty of waters and rivers down here. Lots of fishermen. They got out in their boats, and it was getting the job done. And then we got our brethren from across the Sabine River over there. They all came and showed up too, and that meant a lot to us. If you ever, you know, when you get down this part of Texas, everybody here has family in Louisiana. You know, I don't know it. I grew up here. I'm a native here, and I got plenty of family. One of my cousins, Mike, he's in the Cajun Navy, and he brought his boat here from New Orleans. But it's great. We've helped them out with their floods, and they came and helped us out with our floods. And it's just a bunch of fishermen from the Gulf Coast all getting together and coming up and volunteering their time. Did everything go smooth? You know, most of the time, they were operating in some areas that we weren't even at yet. Right. You know, if we have boats that we're operating in that area, there wasn't a whole lot of actual interaction with them. You know, you're trying to knock out a neighborhood, get this neighborhood cleared, get this neighborhood cleared. And then so people were asking to me, as in the fire department, were we having a lot of interaction and running into them? Yes, that did happen. It was happening where we were meeting and operating with them. But a lot of the times, there's some other part of town or some area that we just haven't got to yet, you know, and then you find out later that that area is cleared by volunteers, you know, that came in and did that. It was an amazing thing, you know, you know, you're looking around at just so much loss and so much, oh my God, when is this going to end? The amount of destruction and the amount of loss involved. And then you see that indomitable spirit come from, you know, around, you know, guys showing up in their big Bigfoot trucks, you know, and their boats, their John boats, and helping everybody out. Is that a little different for us? We're real structured and we operate like this, you know? Yeah, you know, there's things like, well, those guys are doing that, but we can't do that because it violates safety code.
Yeah, yeah.
But so you see that stuff going on, and you know, did some boats get flipped? Yeah. Did some things not go right? Hey, you know, you can take 3 people and 8 people are trying to get on your boat desperate. You know, stuff like that happens. It wasn't all pretty. Most of it was, you know, and then, you know, you work with it. And I think the overwhelming majority of the first responders down here were very, very happy and pleased with the volunteerism that came about. I mean, besides for the Cajun Navy, and all the rescues, you know, just all the trucks, the people showing up, all the docks and all the stuff that showed up at George R. Brown. The whole aspect was really amazing with the volunteers.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, having them there and just like kind of just like what Matt was talking about in the field of having, you know, people who, you know, they're volunteers, they're going to do things how they're going to do it, not the way the Houston Fire Department way of structure and whatever else. Same thing happened in the shelters, right? I was routinely turning away doctors, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, people who were, hey, I'm here, can I help, right? And there were parts of it where we're saying, you know, we appreciate that, but really I need someone to push wheelchairs. I don't need another doctor, right? And so having that volunteerism was really, really important. And we did for the first 48 hours until 48, 72. The disaster medical assistant team didn't take over the primary role of medical care till Wednesday night. We opened the shelter Sunday. So for those first couple days, it was HFD and whatever volunteers came through the door. And it was amazing to have them all there. But in that setting, unlike kind of what Matt was describing, we did have direct interaction with them on a regular basis because we were all in the medical clinic area. And it did require a little bit of controlling, a little bit of structuring, which was a little bit different than kind of what was happening in the streets where they handled that neighborhood, HFD handled this neighborhood, not intentionally, just as the way it fell out. But it was great. The volunteerism was just, you know, kind of really, really made us as excited. Because like I said, when I walked in Sunday, there were lines of dump trucks full of wet people out front. There were several hundred people already in the shelter. And at that point, medical was a couple of ambulance crews that had been called down there and a couple of Red Cross nurses with a box of Band-Aids and some Tylenol. and we're trying to figure out how we're going to take care of the upcoming up to 10,000 people we were going to get. And having those people come in was absolutely indispensable. We could not have done it without the volunteers.
Hey, Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know that, for example, I saw a picture that came out of the crew, and it might have been when you were down there, but you know, and I thought it was a really refreshing picture because our guys deploy, and I know that you go down there, and again, getting back to that kind of, we're going down there to, you know, we're going to saw some trees and do some good and run calls, and so we're giddy and excited about the sexy part of being the firefighter. But I saw a picture come out. It may have been your group, but you guys were helping out like at a donation collection point or something like that. But I guess I know that stuff goes on regularly, and I don't say it as shocked that firemen do that, but I guess let's step outside of the first response, getting back to the volunteerism. But you guys are in a small community that's probably pretty prideful. And I know there's a lot of activities or things that were provided to people that normally don't fall under the scope of what first responders do. Is there anything you can share with that?
Yeah, I think the second group that deployed, which would be Chief Sweet, Bat Chief Sweet, and Captain Bays' group, they were really involved with a shelter that was there in Rockport. There was tons of donations coming in by the truckload, and they were really overwhelmed. They didn't have the staff or the ability to really manage all the things that were coming in. Even with the state assets and federal assets there, they were still having a lot of stuff just kind of piling up on them. So they were asked to go over and help unload one truck, and that turned into probably 2 or 3 days worth of basically organizing the shelter, finding basically a picking order on what you need, to which side of the shelter you would go, and also what resources were available. And if I'm not mistaken, they have also developed, I don't know if you would call it a call list, but kind of a fact sheet perhaps would probably be the better term. Okay, if you're needing this, then this isn't the place, but this place over on XYZ Street is where you need to go because FEMA's got their trailer there. And if you were needing medical stuff, then they had you over to the, you know, another street where they had their trailer and resources set up. So they took, you know, to be honest, they kind of stepped up and took in a leadership role when it kind of to that kind of the liaison position between what really is what we deem first response work and kind of community service. And I know there's not a whole lot of difference between the two, but it wasn't urgent nor emergent, but yet they were still willing to fill that bill.
Excellent.
And we saw that in our shelters too, and HFD personnel early on stepping up, and because we're all used to structure, right? Fire department, we all have a structure and a plan, and this is how we're going to do it. And if there is no structure and there is no plan, then we're going to build a structure. We're going to make it work. And the fire department did a great job. The other group I'd like to throw out from our end in the shelter business was the State Guard. The State Guard was out, and same thing, sorting clothes, moving pallets of water, just whatever they could do to help, whatever they were assigned to do. And they just were like, cool, what else can I do? Hey, you need a hand with that? Pushing wheelchairs, pushing people around in wheelchairs. Stuff like that just became, you know, when you're dealing with sheltering operations of this scale, you know, you don't have enough Red Cross volunteers. You don't have enough volunteers. You need people from first responder roles to step in and fill them. And that was amazing to have.
Hey, Doc, I'm interested in, so when you think about a shelter and throw together 10,000 people in, I mean, that's a city. So not to mention there are people that showed up in dump trucks during a horrendous storm. So they're coming in there. So how do you navigate that many people? So you kind of touched on the dialysis patients, the people that are low on O2. How many people leave their house and leave prescriptions? And I'm not talking about a prescription that, you know, my cholesterol pill, but insulin, things like that. So what, not ever having been involved in a sheltering operation, I know that there are resources available to make that stuff available. But, you know, insulin, for example, for someone to go 24 hours without insulin, that's a problem. So what happens there in the first 24 hours of something like this?
Well, I think that is one of those things that is just completely essential to these kind of operations. I can tell you we had an awful lot of seizures in the first 24 to 48 hours because epileptic patients with seizure disorders coming in without their seizure meds. we were very lucky, and we do, we had an, if you can call it an advantage of being in Houston and being the largest profile shelter at the time setting up. So first of all, it's donations and getting people on the horn early to say, hey, we know we're going to get diabetics. We know we're going to get severe patients. We need these kind of medications to be brought in from donations. We had actually 3 different pharmacies, Kroger, CVS, and Walgreens, all had a presence on site. It was about 48 to 72 hours in, but they got there. And once they got there, then we had a more steady source of medications. Kroger actually brought out a great big trailer, which was a mobile pharmacy, and CVS and Walgreens were using runners to the closest store, which hadn't been flooded, to get meds. But in those first, 48 hours, it was a lot of, getting donations, getting groups like AmeriCares involved who were going to get donations of medication. But then, we needed volunteer pharmacists because you don't want me sorting a box of meds, right? That's not what I'm good at, right? So we had volunteer pharmacists sorting meds, and we essentially built a pharmacy and put a table in front of it and said, go to the counter and you get what you need. But those kind of things, like you said, the chronic care, those chronic medications, kind of the subacute medications, right? Not the cholesterol pill, but the insulin, the anti-epileptics, those meds, became a big issue early on, and we knew we had to come up with a solution for it quick, and we were really lucky. A couple people worked very hard, a couple of volunteers and a couple of our HFD personnel worked together to get people to donate stuff, and I'll be there tomorrow with a truck full of insulin. Awesome. Now what do we do with it? Because it's not something that the fire department is used to distributing, right? Knows how to. So that there were a lot of challenges there, but I think it was handled reasonably well, and I can say that other than acute exacerbations that you would bring by 911 anyway, we really didn't have a lot of people who we sent to the hospitals and clogged up the ERs with, I just don't have insulin, I just don't have my seizure meds, I just don't have whatever, after the first maybe 24 hours.
So I guess having, allowed this to kind of bake for a while, is there anything that the 3 of you take away from this to say, all right, this happens again? And, I guess from 2 perspectives, obviously being at ground zero, like Dr. Schulz you were and Chief White you were. Mike, you go in 7 days later or 3 days later, whatever, to go down there. But what's a takeaway that you might, say, either I saw something work that I'd never thought of before, or next time, if this happens again, God forbid, this is something that I'm gonna make sure happens because I think it will impact something. Just something, I guess, that one of those little words of wisdom that somebody listening to this 5 years from now can think of. I remember this guy saying this. Do you have any thoughts or ideas?
If I can, I guess my thoughts and ideas on, we're past the worst of it now. We're still dealing with it. Is just trusting in the communication process, that macro and micro level, and whatever needs to get done, there's a process for it. Like you guys were just talking about getting all the pharmacies set up and drugs like that. Somebody had to make that phone call. There had to be those communications there, and on some level that happens. And going through something like this, whatever needs to get done on the task level, right? There's some logistical level that can get you what you need. And I know that we had the big OEM bunker, and they were getting, all the area commands, the shelter commands, whatever it was, I had to get comfortable with just like, okay, what's the communication pathway here? And using that,
trusting the process,
like, don't look at anything like it can't be done, because you're going to be asked to do more than you think you're there to do, or that you're capable of, right? But trust in that process of like, hey, there's somebody that I answer to, that singularity of command, right? And this can get up to there, and that person, they might not even know what I want that for, right? But somebody could get me that asset or that resource that I need, and we can get it to the person who's asking me for it, being in the middle position here. And then there's that feedback that you need, right? Did that solve your problem? Yes, it solved my problem. Okay, now on to the next one, right? And I think just that's what I'm walking away with this, Chief. is just more trust in that process and better looking for ways to improve myself on where I fit in on that process. Watching it happen to friends of mine, buddies of mine that were in charge of these boat rescues over here, or that fire from that building that's on fire and the water is over the height of the hydrants and you can't find it, just just amazing what you can get done. There's some, use the command structure that we have, go through it, be patient. It's not going to happen right away. They might not, it's not like incident command out front that says, okay, division, Delta, I'm sending you, engine 1 and engine 2. It's not that simple and matter of fact and right away, but it's going to happen, and just, hey, calm people down. We got a process for this. It's a huge event. Just go up the chain of command, get it back down to you what you need, get it to the people who are asking for it. That's my big walk away from all this, is trusting in that process that we're all taught and we're all coached in, to work within a command system.
Captain McComas, what do you got? If a group of guys are fixing to deploy and go somewhere, help out in a community just like you did, what's going to help them provide the best level of service they can?
Well, going to it with probably the right frame of mind and the right attitude. It's not everything is normal type of day. The way we normally operate, the way things we normally depend on that work for us, whether it be communications, whether it be chains of command, whether it be resource allocation, whether it be, heck, where are we getting fuel for this engine? Those are gone. And so having the ability to kind of be flexible, just like Chief was saying, is trust in the system, trust in the process, and just kind of be flexible enough to roll with the punches and put out the spot fires as they show. The other thing I think that, if you study this at any point in time, I would kind of wonder, in another couple of years when we have a chance to look back at this huge event and see how well did the emergency management plans for each of the different areas, how well did they work? Did they achieve everything that they were trying to, or did they just kind of hit the big ticket items? And it's kind of one of the things I'm kind of geek out on the side for, is the emergency management stuff, just as far as the planning and resource allocation. I do know that our first crews down there, we're running through the chain of command to get resources, but we're hitting bumps and bumps and bumps. And finally, Chief Pennington actually pulled out his cell phone and knew a guy who knew a guy, made a couple of phone calls, and with 48 hours, they had some stuff that they'd been trying to get for 48 before. So, I agree with Chief. Know that chain of command, follow that chain of command, but have a plan B, a plan C, and, plan D might ought to be in the scrapbook somewhere.
Let firemen be firemen.
Exactly. Let us be resourceful. We can make it work. Just give us a little bit of time on the phone.
Dr. Schulz, how about you?
I think that's actually exactly where I was going to go, is what Captain said, is know, and it's one of those things of know the command, and that should be options 1, 2, and 3. But option 4, figure something else out if you have to, and accept help, ask for help early, right? In a setting like this, I got somebody on the phone who says they're going to give me, my example, insulin, right? They're going to get me insulin, or they're going to get me oxygen. We almost ran out of oxygen a couple of times, right? And okay, I'll get you oxygen. Okay, when are you going to get to me? All right, 48 hours. Well, I've got 12 hours of oxygen left. And then, all right, well, I got my 48 hours coming. That's great. I'll get a bunch in 48 hours. So I'm calling Chief White and saying, Chief, we need oxygen. Okay, every unit that goes down there from the fire department is going to bring a couple of D cylinders. We'll make it work. We'll figure it out. But asking for help early, asking for help for stuff you wouldn't normally ask for help from, right? I'm a doctor, not a fireman. I spent 10 years on the box. I'm just as proud as the rest of you. Asking for other doctors to come in and help take care of these patients is not easy. Asking for other fire departments to come help out, asking for help from the Cajun Navy, accepting that kind of help. It's hard for all of us, but recognizing that this is bigger than any of us, bigger than any one person, any one city, any one department, is one of the biggest pieces of this on a scale. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me, is saying, you know what? This never would have happened without some people I never met. Some people I never did meet, just pitching in and helping out. And sometimes they were asked, sometimes they just showed up. And either way, hey, thanks for being here. Here's what I got for you. Let's get to work.
Matt, you said something, and I kind of, I harped on this at KTA a couple of years ago, and I believe it to this day, but everything matters. And of course, right, so we roll out, go to a structure fire. Everybody wants to do what? They either want to be on a search and rescue, or they want to be on a line, but nobody wants that RIT position. nobody wants the non, I don't want to just stand here, right? Nobody wants to be writ until, God forbid, you have to have writ. But, in this particular case, everything matters. And no matter how small the task is, you got to accept your role. And you know what? If your job is to stack boxes in the corner, then be the best box stacking dude that the Houston Fire Department's ever seen. And that's hard. Obviously, we all want to migrate and focus on the stuff that we signed up for. But this is the stuff we signed up for, and I thought that was a really good point to make. I can't tell you enough. I feel bad. Beau, we got fortunate. Yeah.
I was able to send Beau a text.
Yeah.
He wants everybody to know he's alive.
Okay.
The storm has passed Puerto Rico.
Perfect.
And it's still messy there, but the eyes passed over Puerto Rico, and they're gathering their stuff up in a hotel to go out into the island. And there are some collapses there, and they're going to get busy on rescuing people from these collapses. But Beau's alive, and there's resources there from USAR and Texas Task Force 1.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that, and man, all the luck to you. And I tell you what, you guys have done a yeoman's job, and then to turn around, get on a plane, and go off to Puerto Rico and do what he's doing. I'm glad you cleared that up. I wasn't sure if he hit lunchtime was going to go grab a pina colada and head down to the pool there, but. Anyway, man, best of luck to you, Beau, and the work you guys are doing, and I hope you get back soon and get some rest and relaxation. We're going to close this thing out. Our next show, Chief Lasky will be back, should be October the 18th. You can catch great Humpday Hangouts every Wednesday, 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. You get to interact with some really wonderful people and a chance to ask some brilliant minds. Brilliant minds, those are the people on the other shows, some great questions. But as we close out, Dr. Schulz, is there a way that someone, if they had a question for you or wanted to ask you something, that they could email you or something? Do you have an email address that somebody could reach you?
Sure. It's going to be just give it Kevin.Schulz, SCHULZ, at HoustonTX.gov. That's my city email. It's attached to the phone. That's attached to my hip 24 hours a day. So if there's questions, by all means, I'm more than happy to talk to whoever about this. We just appreciate, I'm just excited that people want to hear about it. People want to plan better so that when something bad happens in their community, they can help take care of it.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. And Matt, how about you? Somebody wanted to reach out and get in touch with you.
It's the same. My city email is fine. Matthew.white@HoustonTX.gov.
All right. Cap McComas, how about you?
Oh, okay. Email. mmccomas@cityoflewisville.com.
All right. And I'm Terry T. McGrath at cityoflewisville.com. And if you need to get a hold of Chief Lasky, it's 5alarmleadership@gmail.com. In closing, we always like to say, keeping the men and women serving armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. Never forgetting means never forgetting. And I'll tag on to the very end of that to say my hat's off to the Houston Fire Department. My hat's off to the city of Houston and every affected area down on the coast. We saw some really incredible acts of bravery, generosity, kindness, compassion. It can go on. And that's, at the end of the day, I think is where the real pay comes from. But you guys are doing great work. We're thinking about you, and obviously, if you need anything, you never hesitate to reach out. You did great doing that the first time, but don't forget that we're all still here and we're all still willing to help. With that, I appreciate y'all's time. Thank you. It's been a great panel, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Terry.
Out there.